Love is a universal theme in literature, I imagine, since, well, before people wrote anything down, stories were about love. And our next reader, Jojo Moyes, is a World Book Night title, Me Before You. Again, a story about love. Love between friends that migrates into the love between lovers. A well-loved book by many people. Ladies and gentlemen, Jojo Moyes.
Me Before You is a book about a small-town girl called Lou Clark who goes to work for a quadriplegic man, Will Traynor, and discovers quite early on in her contract that he's lost the will to live. And she decides to change his mind and give him something to live for. And she does this by taking him on a series of adventures. In this extract, he has persuaded her to try something new for a change. He's persuaded her to go to a concert, her first classical concert. With ordinary people, what Camilla Traynor would probably call working class people, I had observed a few basic routines as far as Will was concerned. Most would stare. A few might smile sympathetically, express sympathy, or ask me in a kind of stage whisper what had happened. I was often tempted to respond, unfortunate falling out with MI6, just to see their reaction, but I never did. Here's the thing about middle-class people. They pretend not to look, but they do. They were too polite to actually stare. Instead, they did this weird thing of catching sight of Will in their field of vision and then determinedly not looking at him until he'd gone past, at which point their gaze would flicker towards his wheelchair even while they remained in conversation with someone else. They wouldn't talk about him, though, because that would be rude. As we moved through the foyer of the Symphony Hall, where clusters of smart people stood with handbags and programs in one hand, gins and tonics in the other, I saw this response pass in a gentle ripple which followed us to the stalls. I don't know if Will noticed it. Sometimes I thought the only way he could deal with it was pretend he could see none of it. We sat down, the only two people at the front in the centre block of seats. He stared ahead, his head dipped into his shoulders as if he were trying to become invisible. "This isn't going to work," a little voice said. "Do you need anything?" I whispered. "No." He shook his head. And then he swallowed. "Actually, yes. Something's digging into my collar." I leant over and ran my finger around the inside of it. A nylon tag had been left inside. I pulled at it, hoping to snap it, but it proved stubbornly resistant. "New shirt. Is it really troubling you?" "No, I just thought I'd bring it up for fun." "Do we have any scissors in the bag?" "I don't know, Clark. Believe it or not, I rarely pack it myself." There were no scissors. I glanced behind me where the audience were still settling themselves into their seats, murmuring and scanning their programs. If Will couldn't relax and focus on the music, the outing would be wasted. I couldn't afford a second disaster. "Look, don't move," I said. "What?" Before he could finish, I leant across, gently peeled his collar from the side of his neck, placed my mouth against it, and took the offending tag between my front teeth. It took me a few seconds to bite through it, and I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the scent of clean mail, the feel of his skin against mine, the incongruity of what I was doing. And then finally, I felt it give. I pulled back my head and opened my eyes, triumphant with the freed tag between my front teeth. "Got it," I said, pulling the tag from my teeth and flicking it across the seats. Will stared at me. "What?" I swiveled in my chair to catch those audience members who suddenly seemed to find their programs absolutely fascinating. Then I turned back to Will. "Oh, come on. It's not as if they've never seen a girl nibbling a bloke's collar before." I had briefly silenced him. Will blinked a couple of times, made as if to shake his head. I noticed with amusement that his neck had coloured a deep red. I straightened my skirt. "Anyway," I said, "I think we should both just be grateful that it wasn't in your trousers." And then, before he could respond, the orchestra walked out in their dinner jackets and cocktail dresses, and the audience hushed. I felt a flutter of excitement despite myself. I placed my hands together on my lap, sat up in my seat. They began to tune up, and suddenly the auditorium was filled with a single sound, the most alive, three-dimensional thing I had ever heard. It made the hairs on my skin stand up, my breath catch in my throat. Will looked sideways at me, his face still carrying the mirth of the last few moments. "Okay," his expression said, "we're going to enjoy this." The conductor stepped up, tapped twice on the rostrum, and a great hush descended. I felt the stillness, the auditorium alive, expectant. Then he brought down his baton, and suddenly everything was pure sound. I felt the music like a physical thing. It didn't just sit in my ears, it flowed through me, around me. It made my skin prickle and my palms dampen. Will hadn't described any of it like this. I thought I might be bored. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. And it made my imagination do unexpected things. As I sat there, I found myself thinking of things I hadn't thought of for years, old emotions washing over me, new thoughts and ideas being pulled from me as if my perception itself were being stretched out of shape. It was almost too much, but I didn't want it to stop. I wanted to sit there forever. I stole a look at Will. He was rapt, suddenly unself-conscious. I turned away, unexpectedly afraid to look at him. I was afraid of what he might be feeling, the depth of his loss, the extent of his fears. Will Trainor's life had been so far beyond the experiences of mine. Who was I to tell him how he should want to live it? We waited until the auditorium was empty, then I wheeled him out, down to the car park in the lift, and loaded Will up without incident. I didn't say much. My head was still ringing with the music, and I didn't want it to fade. We pulled up outside the annex. In front of us, just visible above the wall, the castle sat, floodlit under the full moon, gazing serenely down from its position on top of the hill. "So," he said, "you're not a classical music person." I looked into the rearview mirror. Will was smiling. I didn't enjoy that in the slightest. Yeah, I could tell. I grinned at him. "I really loved it," I said. "I'm not sure I'd like all classical music, but I thought that was amazing." I rubbed my nose. "Thank you. Thank you for taking me." We sat in silence, gazing at the castle. Normally, at night, it was bathed in a kind of orange glow from the lights dotted around the fortress wall. But tonight, under a full moon, it seemed flooded in an ethereal blue. We sat for a moment longer, listening to the engine tick its way to silence. "Right," I said, unfastening my belt. "We'd better get you in. The evening routine awaits." "Just a minute, Clark." I turned in my seat. Will's face was in shadow, and I couldn't quite make it out. "Just hold on, just for a minute." "Are you all right?" I found my gaze dropping towards his chair, afraid some part of him was pinched or trapped, that I'd got something wrong. "I'm fine. I could see his pale collar, his dark suit jacket a contrast against it. "I don't want to go in just yet. I just want to sit and not have to think about..." He swallowed. Even in the half dark, it seemed effortful. "I just want to be a man who has been to a concert with a girl in a red dress, just for a few minutes more." I released the door handle. "Sure." I closed my eyes and lay my head against the headrest, and we sat there together for a while longer, two people lost in remembered music, half hidden in the shadow of a castle on a moonlit hill. Thank you.